maps, on all these art maps, and been doing it for 30 years. I've won all these awards, and what have I learned? What have I got to show for myself? What do I have to say to people? What have I noticed? Well, what I've noticed is that there's a very cool type of map that the Swiss started making 400 years ago. And it evolved into that first slide that we saw with Zermatt and the Matterhorn. But it's a type of map that we don't make in this country. And as it happens, the Swiss set the standard for geographic literacy. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that they grow up looking at maps that make the world a very understandable place. And we grow up looking at maps that make the world seem very confusing. And my map of the United States is a map of that same style. It is made with all the same principles. It doesn't look quite the same, but the concepts, the cartographic concepts are the same as far as making it legible and things like that. We have this odd situation in the United States, and that's that we don't make maps of fundamental geography. And then we wonder why we don't know geography. And it's caused this informational void that makes geographic literacy impractical. It's as if, could you get somebody interested in music without ever letting them hear any?
Yeah.
No way. So how can you get people interested in geography without showing it to them? And the better the music, the more likely is somebody's going to get interested in music. If you want to get interested in opera or something like that, go to New York City, or where it's performed to its very highest level. Then you get inspired and you just understand what it's all about. Well, it's the same thing with maps. If we're going to get people interested in geography, it's going to have to be with some pretty cool maps. But they take a long time to make. So I learned that we've always had these transportation maps like this. They started back in the 1850s or something like that as railroad maps that were created to promote rail travel. That's where Rand McNally got their start. They were making rail maps, but they were making their money printing the tickets. But anyway, this map that I made for Rand McNally. Now transportation maps look a lot like this. I believe this is a Google map, and these are fine maps. They allow us to get from A to B without a lot of challenge, and I don't have any qualms with them. We've had maps like this beautiful relief map of the Southern Sierra down in California, made by Raven Maps in Medford. And whereas it's a beautiful depiction of the land, it doesn't do justice to really any other part of the geographic picture. Like, where is it forested? And the Kern River is in that deep north-south running valley right here, but you can't really see the Kern River, so you don't really see the connection. Then there's not elevations on towns and things like that. So it's beautiful for one slice of the geographic pie, but not the reasonable combination of elements. We've had maps like this. This is from the Atlas of Oregon, showing traffic flow. It's like, you've probably noticed coming back from Portland on I-5 that you're always looking forward to getting to Albany because that's where the traffic starts to thin out. Well, here's a cartographic representation of that. And we've had maps like this. This is a map by National Geographic, and it's a political map. It has brightly colored state boundaries on it and a slathering of place names. But we've never had maps like this that are just illustrations of the land with type labels over the top so that you can see what's being identified. A basic illustration of the lay of the land. So what are these maps all about? These maps that I call classical cartography. Another name for it is general maps, which is really kind of a boring name. That Swiss map that I showed at the beginning, the name of it is General Map of Switzerland. These maps have lots of geographic content. They're faithful to geography. My U.S. map is as true to geography as a geography professor would make it. I'm not trying to I didn't do anything to try to sell more copies. I just wanted to make it geographically reliable. And they need to be clear. This geography needs to be presented or illustrated clearly so that you can see it and understand it. So this is from the U.S. map, and these maps have more than elevations, just say, of mountain peaks. They have elevations of cities and important water bodies too. These maps have a well-defined transportation network, the basic transportation. And if you look at this map, our major freeways and highways create this network that looks like it was made by a bunch of deer or something, just following the paths of least resistance from one feeding place to another. But they're humanity, and they're created by very highly trained engineers and with millions and millions of dollars. But the effect, when you get way back, they look like deer trails to me. And these maps need a really objectively selected representation of places. On the Essential Geography map, I established what were the most important places in any given area and represented just those. Rivers are as important as transportation. If you can't see the rivers, how can you learn about them? And also, I think one cool stuff like the Continental Divide. The Continental Divide isn't on National Geographic's map of the United States. It's like, well, isn't it important? And also, I put on stuff like the Continental Divide Trail and stuff like that. Time zone boundaries. Maps don't traditionally have time zone boundaries, but I think they're very important, And this is a cool slide too. The reason I chose this particular area is because this time zone boundary doubles back on itself. So this is how does this even work? This is mountain time here, and you go to the east into Pacific time. That's the only place in the United States that happens. And, why not put on stuff that people are really enchanted with, like Route 66. On my U.S. map, you can follow Route 66 from Chicago right clear across the United States, all the little turns and things, all the towns it goes through. And then if you know the geography of Los Angeles, you can see that it goes right down Santa Monica Boulevard to the sea. And historical places are all very important to us. There's a movie being shown about what happened in Selma. Geographic fidelity. Let's learn about that. Here, as I was telling you before, I put the most important places on the map instead of just filling up the emptiness with type labels. And that allows us, for example, to see that Indianola and Cleveland and Clarksdale and Greenville are the important, and Leland, etc., are the important populated places of the Mississippi Delta. If you fill the map up with place names like National Geographic does, you don't know that Leland is any more important than Shaw. Another thing that happens, you fill up your the map with place names like that, willy-nilly, and you can't label cool things like the Mississippi Delta, where the blues came from. The other drawback, and really the most important drawback to filling up a map with place labels like that, is that it gives you the impression that a place like Mississippi has as many people as a state like Ohio. And Ohio's got 3.5 times the population of Mississippi. I consider this sort of treatment of filling up areas with place names as geographic disinformation. And I'm here to tell you that our geographic leadership in our country is publishing stuff like this. And to me, it's like, why are we geographically illiterate? Well, because we're not being provided information on which to become literate. Steens Mountain, here's from the Essential Geography, here's National Geographic's. They've labeled Steens Mountain, but they haven't shaded it. There is no mountain being represented there, but they have labeled it. And, that's like geographic crazy making. So, imagine for a moment, if you would, is anybody getting tired? Do I need to speed up and get done with this, or we get, okay. Imagine for a moment that the world we're not this big sphere that we live on, but that we're a gigantic Douglas fir cone. This is how we would see it represented by standard American cartography. And we go, okay, that's okay, I can sort of see some things there, but it's not very interesting. But Douglas fir cones can be represented much more elegantly than this. Professional botanical illustrators like Jeannie Dibbins over in Bend paints them like that. So if this were the world, we would know a lot more about it and find it much more interesting to study and become aware of than this. And my premise in this talk is that we need to start making maps that are like this. Why treat the world like a moonscape? You know, this is so abstract that it's really hard for me to imagine this as a representation of something real. You know, the way geography is approached in the United States anyway is like it's a very dry study of a make-believe place. You know, it's an abstraction of something that's make-believe. Well, how can you get interested in that? How can you expect anybody to think that that's important? That's what this type of map, to me, makes geography seem to be. Whereas this, it's much more reminiscent of the real world. And so I feel like it brings geography alive. Clarity. Okay. We're really getting into Geography 101. Arthur Robinson, he is the father of American cartography. He is the geography professor at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, who goes over to the engineering school and says, "Come on, folks, you're not engineers anymore, you're geographers." And so that's where, and this didn't happen until the 1950s, where cartography was considered to be anything other than just a representation of the measurements of the land. And to this day, unfortunately, that's principally where cartography remains. It's representation of measurement instead of illustration of geography. Okay, about clarity. The general rules of type positioning have all been violated, and Arthur Robinson was referring to this map that he had created. And I want to point out or draw your attention to these type labels for cities going this way and that way and that way. And then also this black line representing the state boundary running right through that black type, making that black type and the state boundary both confusing to the map user. Yet, those principles are being violated by National Geographic. You know, you see black lines running through black type all over the place, and look at this arrangement of type going all these different directions. This map attempts to set a better example. And so you can see the type labels have been placed horizontally for the places, and over here on the New Jersey, Pennsylvania border, they've broken the state boundary so it doesn't run through the type label for New York City. And those are the principles that I follow to a very deep degree, and there's a lot of subtleties and things involved. But I break lines, like down here you can see this line doesn't run through those, and we're breaking lines all over the place. I mean, it's a very involved thing to keep all your type labels for like type features running in the same direction and breaking lines. Just trying with everything you can figure out to make things clearer, you do. Like there's probably 100,000 individually identifiable details on this map that I have attended to myself. Somebody with 30 years of cartographic experience attends to 100,000 details on a map. And the map is much easier to read than if you don't attend to those 100,000 details. You just let your computer go, there's a good place for a type label. So, and if you do this, if you follow these basic rules, and that's just some basic rules about type placement. There's a few others, but fortunately, cartography is not rocket science. It's not that hard to learn. It just takes a long time to do those things. But if you do them, you can see things like on my map on the left, you can see the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers joining downtown Pittsburgh to form the Ohio. You can just see that. You don't get that same basic geography in National Geographic's map. You can't these are hugely enlarged at their printed size. You would need a magnifying glass to follow the rivers on it. And I think you could have these old style maps your whole life and never know that there was an Ohio River, unless you maybe lived on it. And then also, you know, if you have the content and the clarity, you can see things like Minneapolis, St. Paul is about 800 feet in elevation. It's one continuous urban area that straddles the Mississippi River. The place called Mall of America is there. The Fitzgerald Theater, where Prairie Home Companion comes from. University of Minnesota is there. And so you get the geographic picture of Minneapolis. One more thing that I'll point out while I'm on my rant about National Geo is one of the basic principles of cartography is there should be nothing on the map that the average user can't easily see. Well, you know, National Geo puts a capital B right over the airport in Minneapolis. So without a magnifying glass or a presenter telling you that symbol is there, you wouldn't even know that Minneapolis has an airport. So, you know, just another violation of basic principles. And if you do all these things, you can see that Eugene, Oregon, and Springfield, about 400 feet in elevation. It's at the southern end of a flat, unforested valley with hills and mountains covered with forests around it. There's a thing to the west called the Oregon Country Fair and the Three Sisters Wilderness area, the Pacific Crest Trail, the South Sister, and you get it. There's Mary's Peak that we can see on the horizon up past Corvallis, and you just, from a map like this, you just get the basic geography. So you don't have to live here in Eugene to know this about our area. You can look at the map and you can see what the basic geography of Eugene is. And living here, we can look at what the basic geography of any place in the United States is. So there have been a few attempts to produce maps that are geographically oriented. This is a map, another one by National Geographic, State of Washington. I guess they made this for the purpose of geographic education. But you know, what's the elevation of Vancouver? And is it an urban area? Or is it just a small town? You know, it's not connected to anything. You know, we can't see where it's forested. We don't know what the elevations of these lakes up here are, etc. You know, things like that. Where's the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area? We got Beacon Rock State Park, but not that other thing. And then I don't know whose idea would have been to leave off Portland. But you know, that decision was not made by a geographer. You know, because geographers know that half the people in Vancouver work in Portland. So this is, you know, it's all connected. So here's how I treated an adjacent state. This on my Oregon map. I mean, look at all this content, and there's a lot of geography on this map. All the geography of an essential geography map is on this map, but it's a little hard to see because it's a transportation map. You look at it, you see mostly roads, and the map was made for that purpose. But it can be repurposed, and I hope to do that in the future into a geography map. So we've seen that the way the world is presented has a lot to do with how much information you can take from a map. And we saw this example, and we saw that this represents an area with much greater clarity and fidelity. Another problem, and then we're getting pretty close to wrapping this up, is that the way that geographic information is presented in America is very fractured. You know, we have iPhones, we have atlases, we have, you know, Google Maps and all that. And they present us with information in just tiny little chunks. And you cannot put all those tiny little chunks together in your head and create an understanding of the lay of the land. And this represents that. And all I've done here is a little geology on a chunk of map to show you how difficult it is, even when it's fractured or fragmented just a little bit, to understand the lay of the land. And this is up near Anchorage. Here's Anchorage right there. To understand the lay of the land, we need these big maps that have a lot of detail on them, a lot of resolution, a lot of information. And you know, that represent a place like this. So we go, aha, that's what it looks like up around Anchorage. You know, and I think that is why high quality paper maps will always be valuable. You know, until somebody's computer screen has the resolution of a printing press, I don't know how you're going to get all this information onto any screen. I was at Best Buy's the other day, and they had this cool thing playing on this widescreen TV. And so I went up and I looked at it, and I was checking it out, and then I talked to the representative there, and he said, yeah, that screen has 20 million pixels on it. And I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. My Essential Geography map has 35 billion pixels times 6. There's 6 colors of ink that went into making that map, and each one of those colors is represented with 35 billion pixels. 2400 DPI. So now we're back to this, to a general map, a classical cartography map of Switzerland, and you can see they've broken lines for type to go through, and they're all the places, representing populated places. They run horizontally, so that you know that they're all related. And here's an elevation of Zermatt and an elevation for the Matterhorn, so you can see that, I checked it out before the presentation. That's like 9,300 feet of elevation difference between the two. And I swear, if you close your eye, you can see all 9,300 feet of it. He's asking how old this map is. This was made by hand. I don't happen to know how old it is. It's probably made in the 60s or 70s. And as you can see, it's got this illustrative quality to it. If you took all those type labels off of there, it would look like an illustration done by a very skilled illustrator of the land. Then we put type labels on it, we call it a map. But you can see the red roads. I used red roads on my Essential Geography map. I tried every other color of the rainbow. Found out, well, red's it, that sort of thing. And so my hypothesis is that if we ever want to be geographically literate in the United States, what is that? I'm always troubled by these calls for reintroducing geographic education into schools, because really, what's geographic literacy? And geographic literacy is something different to everybody. I think if you understand the geography of your hometown, you're geographically literate. You have some sort of connection to your surroundings. My geographic knowledge falls off pretty rapidly when you get away from North America, but I'm certainly geographically literate. I I went to a geography bee one time, and I was pretty good in the first couple of rounds, but man, those high school kids knew a lot more about South American stuff than I did. But so what is geographic literacy? Isn't it what we really want, is people to be interested in geography and their surroundings and this beautiful world that we live in? Or do we want people to be able to pass tests? The geographic illiteracy is not a problem because so many kids fail geography tests, and they certainly do. Geographic illiteracy is a problem because geography is a way of looking at the world that is very enriching to our lives. We all understand that a flower is a beautiful thing, but we don't all understand that the surface of the world is a very beautiful thing, with all these patterns of culture and landforms and land cover like forest and cities. It creates this incredible tapestry of elements that are all interwoven and interconnected. Every road is placed in the path of least resistance, and things like that. So we have this beautiful thing called geography, and I think the tragedy of geographic illiteracy is that nobody sees that tapestry. And without maps like this, I don't know how you're going to get people to see that tapestry and become interested in it. And so I call for the creation of better maps in the United States. And it's kind of a catch-22. It's like, how do you get people to fund something like the creation of exquisite maps when they're not interested in geography. If we were interested in geography, we would already have these maps. You know, but we're not. We're as a culture, we're not interested in our surroundings. So what's it going to take? Well, you know, I strongly suspect that nobody ever made a really detailed geography map of the United States like I did, because they knew there's no market for it. You know, there's never been a map like that, so, you know, who are you going to sell it to? There's no ready market for it. Well, somebody had to take that chance. Somebody with a little vision had to make a map and then figure out how to get people interested in it. And that's what I've been doing for the last 4 years, is trying to get people interested in this type of cartography. And I believe that if the whole United States were mapped, especially like if it were mapped like the Swiss do, you know, we'd be geographically literate, and so, you know, the money to do that is probably going to have to come from foundations, you know, where you can get one person behind you or a group of people behind you and support the creation of these things. But you know, I once sat down and tried to figure out how much it would cost to map. To make an essential geography map of each state. It was something like $50 million, you know. Seems like a lot of money, but you know, and most of that $50 million is for postage to send them out to the schools. You know, and how much do we spend, how many miles of freeway can we build for $50 million? You know? So I think that we'll be a geographically literate society when we start to prioritize geography. You know, and I'm not talking about creating art that is so above and beyond all other fields of cartographic or artistic endeavor. All I'm saying is we need to make maps that are made to the same artistic standard that we already have come to expect in things like medical illustration and botanical illustration, like we see in this Douglas fir cone, painted by an artist in Bend. So, thank you very much.